Mark Twain once said that the Gilded Age had a pleasing appearance that concealed something of little worth. Even though the Gilded Age was a prosperous time, the people were unhappy. After the Civil War, farmers, mainly in the Midwest, were against the monopolistic grain transport. An employee at the Department of Agriculture in 1866, Oliver Hudson Kelley, started the Granger movement after he visited the South. Kelley started the Patrons of Husbandry in 1867 in the hope of bringing farmers together for educational discussions. Minnesota was, at first, the only state responsive to the movement, but by 1870 all states had granges or local units. By the mid-1870s there were close to 800,000 national members, and almost every state had at least one grange. The main pull for farmers to join the movement was to do something against monopolistic railroads and grain elevators. They believed the railroad rates were too expensive. The railroads either ignored this or went to court against the Granger movement. One of the famous Supreme Court cases, Munn v. Illinois in 1877, helped the state's regulation of railroads to better benefit the farmers. This Supreme Court case stated that the government could regulate private property if it was for the public's use. Another case against the railroads went to the Supreme Court in 1886. The Wabash case was also dealing with the state of Illinois. This case found an Illinois law that prohibited long and short haul clauses in transportation invalid. This case determined that states are denied the ability to regulate interstate railroad rates. This led to the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission. The Interstate Commerce Commission Act was approved on February 4, 1887. This act created a commission that looked over the railroads, which was the first industry to need federal regulation. The Interstate Commerce Commission, or ICC, was a board of 5 members, formed due to the public's demand for railroad operations to be regulated. The act called for just and reasonable rates. The ICC challenged the laissez-faire economic philosophy by giving Congress the right to regulate private corporations that participated in interstate commerce. 3 years after the Interstate Commerce Act, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibited the creation of trusts. Many states had passed similar laws, but the laws that the states passed could only regulate intrastate commerce. A trust is an arrangement by which shareholders in multiple companies agree to transfer their shares into a single trust. In exchange, the shareholders receive a certificate entitling them to a specified share of the total earnings of the jointly managed companies. The trusts came to dominate a number of major industries. While monopolies and trusts crippled some industries, unions crippled others. The most famous workers' strike occurred at the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago, Illinois, that lasted nearly 2 months. In reaction to wage cuts and their employers' mistreatment, the Pullman Company's workers started a strike, causing a ripple effect across the nation. The strike brought the nation's railroad traffic to a near standstill until the government intervened and dispatched the army to help get the trains running again. Shortly after the conflict, the American Railroad Union was broken due to problems in leadership. As more and more of the nation arose on strike, prices of steel plummeted, causing yet another strike. For over 5 months in 1892, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers and the Carnegie Steel Company fought over wage cuts, plant closings, and mistreatment from their employer, eventually turned into a bloody battle over the Homestead plant. After being notified of the strike, and the plant manager, Henry C. Frick, reacted by creating a 12-foot high fence around the steel plant, now known as Fort Frick. The workers on strike took over the steel plant. As the conflict waged, the first shots were fired as Frick's hired detectives tried to retake the steel plant, leaving 3 detectives and 9 workers dead. The conflict was eventually resolved, but the reputation of Andrew Carnegie would never be the same. One of the most famous riots was the Haymarket Square riots. In 1886, at the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company in Chicago, the workers began a strike in the hope of gaining a shorter workday. On May 3rd, the strike went awry when a police officer killed one of the strikers. The next day, the strike got bloodier when a large group of people protesting police brutality met at Haymarket Square. When the police got there, the protests went from violent to peaceful. A bomb was thrown at the police trying to disperse the crowd, killing 6, and the police reacted by shooting and killing 4 protesters. These riots showed that the Knights of Labor had members who were radical and violent. Dropping membership caused problems within the Knights of Labor's leadership. The Haymarket Square riots led to many unions forming, most notably the American Federation of Labor, because the Knights of Labor eventually died out. During the Gilded Age, groups of workers came together to form labor unions in reaction to big businesses. These unions were created to protect the rights of the collective workforce from employer mistreatment, wage cuts, and inequality. The Noble Order of the Knights of Labor was founded in 1869 by Uriah Stevens and 5 other former members of the Garment Cutters Association of Philadelphia. The organization was open to all working people except for bankers, lawyers, stockbrokers, doctors, and liquor manufacturers. It was the first union to attempt to unionize women and led to multiple other unions across the nation. In 1886, the American Federation of Labor was formed, founded by Samuel Gompers, which united multiple skilled unions, including the Masons, the Hat Makers, and the Cigar Makers Union, into the Federation of Skilled Laborers. The American Federation of Labor served as the preeminent national labor organization until the Great Depression. Women also felt hardship in the workplace. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union looked to solve the same issues men face and some of their own. The ILGW, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, was actually 7 smaller unions that were united in 1900. Strikes were a common thing in the Gilded Age. Private businesses were dwindling and more power was being given to the corporations. The workers demanded more and more rights, but when they were rejected, strikes broke out until they got what they wanted. The employers did all they could to keep their employees in their place and stop them from rebelling. One tactic was the Yellow Dog contract. Employees signed these contracts, saying they wouldn't join any unions, a corporation's biggest fear. When strikes broke out, scabs, or temporary workers, were hired to take the place of the regular workers. This is when things turned violent. Fights broke out, some people died. Employers took out things to court, and strikes were ruled illegal. If strikes continued, all participants would be put in jail. When these attempts failed, the government would send military officials to end the rebellions. Miners in Illinois also protested. Their pay was cut time after time, even though they worked in hazardous conditions for 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. During the winter, miners may not have seen daylight for a week. Those who protested were fired, blacklisted, meaning the employees' names were put on a list and they couldn't seek employment in that field of work elsewhere. Unions, strikes, and the government action created conflict among the workers and corporations, a separation that was more than clear. The common man of the Gilded Age demanded